Well, good afternoon to some, good morning to others. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are incredibly privileged that you've chosen to spend some time with Bo and I to review some really significant data as it relates to higher education. I'm so glad to be with you. My name is Allison Reeves. I'm Senior Vice President with CCS, and I'll let Bo introduce himself.
Thanks, Allison. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bo Rice. I'm a senior partner with CCS, been with the firm for 35 years, and I oversee our Mid-Atlantic and Southeast operations. Back to you, Allison.
Thanks so much, Bo. And now we'd love to learn a little bit about you. If you wouldn't mind just popping open your chat, we're going to ask you three different things. First, since we're all having a very exciting conversation about higher education, let us know which school you might represent. What is the school that you went to? What is the school you are most proud of to represent as your alma mater? We're looking for some chat lines now. I think everybody's a little shy, Bo. You might have to kick us off. But we'd love to know which alma maters are represented today. So we've got University of Detroit Mercy, we've got Cornell, we've got Denison, the Maurice A. Dean School of Law at Hofstra, excellent representation, University of Vermont. Somebody went to Columbia, amazing, welcome, welcome. We see somebody from Bryant University in Rhode Island, somebody from JMU, I love it. Excellent, well, keep them coming, keep them coming. Next, we'd love to learn, where are you based? I'll go ahead and put mine in. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia. If you are anywhere near, come by and say hello. We'd love to see where else everybody else is dialing in from. We see somebody from Philadelphia, somebody from Toronto, hi from Baltimore, Middletown, Connecticut, somebody from Los Angeles. You woke up really early today. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got somebody from Long Island as well, and somebody in Northeast Ohio. Excellent. Now, the last question. This will be the easiest. And since we're just about heading into summer, it'll be something for us all to think about. Which do you prefer? Sneakers or flip-flops? Sneakers or flip-flops? Or do you call them something else? Do you call them tennis shoes or slippers? That's another geographic consideration that we always like to keep in mind. I like sneakers too. They tend to give you a little bit more support, but the Vionics brand of flip-flops are really great for your arches. Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you so much for giving us a really great overview of which schools you represent, where you're based, and your preferred footwear. With that, I'm going to turn it on over to Bo.
Thanks so much, Allison, and echoing you, we're grateful to each of you. And we want to recognize, we want to thank everyone, but especially recognize our past and current CCS client partners who registered for today's conversation. Apologies, I'm going to probably miss a few, but I'll do some fast reading, and here we go. Baruch College, Columbia University, City University of New York, Duke Health, Fairfield University, Fordham University, Franciscan University, Goucher College, Harrisburg Area Community College, Hagerstown Community College, and this is, as Allison informed me a few minutes ago, Community College Month, Hofstra University, Howard University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, Mount St. Mary's University, Muhlenberg College, Northeastern University, Rutgers University, Seminary of the Southwest, Spelman College, St. John's University, the State University of New York System, the University of Maryland School of Medicine, the University of Scranton, University of Texas System, United States Naval Academy, UC San Diego, UC San Francisco, University of Chicago, and last but certainly not least, the United States Military Academy at West Point. Thank you all. So let's begin by reviewing our philanthropic landscape. And the more chats and questions we get and conversation, for obvious reasons, the better. This first slide charts or tracks 40 years of US giving in terms of current dollars. That's the aqua colored line, and inflation adjusted dollars, the dark blue bars. The upward trend, touching wood here, has continued in 2020, reached an all-time high, as we share here, of $471.44 billion with a B dollars. As I'm sure we all know, in mid-June, typically it's about the 15th or 16th. Giving USA is going to provide us with the 2021 data. But we are encouraging, as you see in this second blue box, that in the Black Butt Institute sampling of nearly 8,700 organizations, giving grew year on year by some 9%. So perhaps half full over here, we're going to learn in June that total giving in the US in 2021 exceeded 500 billion. It looks like that's what's going to happen. You heard it here first. Let's go to the next slide. So particularly germane to our conversation this afternoon, this morning, wherever you may be, giving to education in 2021, as you see, attained $71.34 billion. It was the second in terms of the 10 different sectors. And ever since I've been in this business for more than 3 decades, education is always number 2. Back in the mid 80s, early 90s, religion, faith-based, which as you see is at the very top with 131 billion in 2020 philanthropy, it was in the low 40s, even mid 40s%. And for obvious reasons, it's down to about 3 of every $10 are provided to religious faith-based organizations. You see the rest of these. We would add in the blue box that a volunteer supportive education survey showed that with higher ed, the increase in FY 21, so year ending June 30th, 2021, was up nearly 7%. So that too is encouraging. Half of last year, this was monitored and up almost 7%. Go to the next slide, please. So we're providing here a higher education snapshot. This is from the National Center, as you see at the very bottom, of education statistics. The 2020-2021 data has not yet been released, but as you see, top to bottom, over 3,700 colleges and universities, about 19.4 million students, of which about 6 of every 10 are female. And student debt in the US totals 1.7 trillion. And I'm encouraged by this anyway. In the last quarter of last year, total student debt for the first time ever declined. First time ever in history that student debt declined. Still a staggering figure, of course. And then finally, during the 2019-2020 academic year, as you see, over 4 million degrees were awarded, of which over 3 million were associates and bachelors, close to a million were masters, and the balance were doctorate degrees. So that's some a philanthropic snapshot to remind us. Let's now shift to our philanthropy pulse. So we surveyed in the CCS Philanthropy Pulse, as you see in bold, 78 institutions, higher education institutions, and they comprised a broad range of, as you see on the left, the different sectors or institution types, locations led by the Northeast with almost 1 in every 2 respondents, and then you see the other areas of our country. And finally, a variety of annual operating budgets. The largest one being annual operating budgets of between 100 million and $500 million. So I'll hand it over to Allison in a moment, but what we're going to do is cover 4 core themes. Clockwise, upper left, optimism for major or leadership gifts. Secondly, the obstacles we're seeing in hiring and retention. Next, building as you see, data-driven fundraising shop. And finally, DEI in donor relations, the importance and priority of it. Allison, over to you, please.
Indeed. And Bo, as we think about our 50 closest friends in higher ed that are on our call today, we do want to steer a conversation around optimism for major gifts. And we'll go on to the next slide. If our friends could let us know in the chat, if you filled out the pulse survey, that would be really helpful. Bo mentioned that 78 respondents participated. If you were one of them, please do let us know. As we think about, as Bo mentioned, one of the main themes that emerged around this survey pertained to optimism toward major gifts. And if you will, just take a look with me here. When we think about the percentages of those who responded, overwhelmingly most are very optimistic about major gifts, comprising a large scale amount of fundraising overall. If you all will look with me at the table to our right-hand side, we get a good sense of where our respondents fall in terms of how they categorize a major gift. Looks like about 32% of our respondents offered that a gift amount between $5,000 and $10,000 comprised a major gift. That's compared to about 43% who responded that their gift range would fall more between the amounts of $25,000 and $50,000. Now, what we did see was that there are some sort of gaps in where we're sort of targeting some of our major gifts. No one responded that a major gift fell between $10,000 and $25,000, and that could be because this 32% might be considering it in the future. We saw the other gap. No one really considers a gift between $50,000 and $100,000 to be a major gift. And that's okay because we've got 43% who might also be willing to consider it moving forward. As we look at the chart on the left-hand side, we saw that 14% responded in terms of how they believe planned or deferred gifts factored into their portion of fundraising that they do overall. We're likely going to see that change as we look toward the biggest shift and transfer of wealth in a generation to occur in the coming years. So we'll likely see a heavier focus on that. We saw about 26% of respondents offer that foundation and corporate grants also comprise a good amount of their overall fundraising. We'll go on to the next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the optimism toward major gifts is largely positive across the scale. You'll see with me in the teal sections toward the bottom, the majority of folks saw an increase this current year, and in terms of the survey, saw an increase in mid-level gifts and major gifts. We see that falls just between the 67 and 68% range, which we love to see. Now, a little on the lower side, about 33 to 38% of folks saw an increase in corporate, government, and foundation giving. And that probably has to do with that major pandemic that we've got going on. And we just consider all things social and global when it comes to monitoring these kinds of trends as we look at our own philanthropy. We saw that about 51% of respondents saw the same amount of giving from corporations. And that's sort of compared to the 28% who saw the same amount of giving in mid-level and major gifts at 22%. Overall, a lot of workshops are focusing their cultivation efforts and their stewardship work around cultivating major gifts, which we always love to see. We'll go to the next slide, please. And so we think of big money campaigns. These are the campaigns that often lead with significant levels of gifts, large commitments over time, so multi-year giving, and we see a few other factors. And so as you and your development team think about making that big step toward launching a big money campaign, there are a couple factors to think about. One is to look at and be proud of your history of major gifts. And that also relates to that chart that we saw around what qualifies as a major gift. And if you're going to build a trajectory toward a big money campaign, you may want to think about increasing the level of size of what a major gift is considered so that you can start to attract more of them. Second is a consistent level of cultivation. Cultivating donors over time and their families can often lead to a really great glide path toward a big money campaign. Next is the confidence of leadership. And what does that mean? It means that every member of leadership, whether it's executive level leadership or board and trustee level leadership, is involved in making a significant gift. And it's good to have a solid history of doing that before you step into the area of doing a big money campaign. Last and not least is an engaged president, someone who can really take the campaign forward and make sure it's successful with cultivating large and significant gifts. Well, I'll kick it on over to you to highlight some other items related to big money campaigns.
Thanks, Allison. So we'll go back to that slide if we could. There we go. Yeah, some of these 10 and 9-figure efforts are underway, as you see in just looking at the amounts raised, while others like the United States Naval Academy and the University of the South, or Sewanee, have recently completed their efforts. Especially in the 10-figure or billion-plus campaigns, one or numerous, for obvious reasons, 100 million plus gifts and pledges were secured, and obviously numerous 8-figure gifts. It's not on any of these slides, but CCS recently did some benchmarking in terms of billion-dollar plus higher education campaigns. And I'll just share with us 3, what we find quite interesting core data points. First, the largest gift of these billion-plus campaigns, it ranged from a low of 10% to a high of 30% of the total funds raised. So the top gift, 1/10 to 3/10 of the total funds raised. The top 5 gifts in these billion-dollar campaigns range from a low of 22%, or about 1/5, on up to 43% of the total funds raised. And finally, our exploration yielded that 9, 8, and 7-figure gifts typically comprise at least 4/5, at least 80% of all the funds raised. So big money campaigns, big money gifts and pledges win the day early on, but as we all know, we've got to have far more than. We have an update on UNC's campaign, which is great, thank you. We've got to have as full participation to expand and sustain philanthropy at our institutions now and going forward. Allison, I'll turn it back to you.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Bill. And while we still are riding high on the wave of major gifts and big money campaigns, we'll switch to the next slide and think about other trends that are happening in our field. So right now we're going to take a bit of a pivot, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities when it comes to hiring and retaining really good staff members. We'll pivot to the next slide. I think we all know we're in the midst of the great resignation across our country, where folks are just considering, their livelihoods and their professional paths. And as we think about the 78 people who responded to this particular survey, 41% cited hiring and retaining fundraising staff members as a significant and top challenge that their organizations are facing. And if you're considering something similar, if this is a challenge also in your space, I'd love to learn what kind of positions you find it a little bit more difficult to fill than you have in previous years past. And for those of us who are considering this as a long-term challenge, we have to think of some long-term solutions as well. There's this sense of creating a culture of belonging within our development work and within our overall organizations. So that's something we'll tap into a little bit later as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another piece to start thinking about is how you build a pipeline of opportunities for your fundraising staff. Once they've met the goals of one area of work, what's next for them? And being able to define that in a very clear way can certainly assist with some retention challenges. Last but not least, the idea of celebrating success. We don't always have to have a big money campaign to be successful in what we do. And so how we look at donor retention, the number of donor visits, and a lot of other data pieces can really help us understand and reward talented staff members. And we hope that that'll help to address this issue of hiring and retaining really good staff members. We always have the sense that people give to people. And so we want to make sure we're starting with the right people and the right team to make sure our fundraising work is a success. And if you have any comments or suggestions just around, how our field continues to consider this and deal with it, would love to see that in the chat. For now, we're going to pivot on over to a poll question. For those of us on the line, we've got a few more folks who dialed in. I would love to hear from you. Do you feel like your advancement operation is adequately staffed? And we think about that maybe in the course of the past year. For the past year, has your entire development team had the appropriate number of people, had the appropriate roles filled, and had the right talent in the right place? So if you can, just go ahead and answer that. So we'll see that 79% of our friends on the call do not feel like their operations are adequately staffed. And so what we want to do is really consider some opportunities to really help us get to a different place. And so if you do have any suggestions in the chat, please feel free to go ahead and pop them in now. We love it when our workshops, Bo, can help us sort of share our experiences and best practices. And so, we've got a considerable issue here when it comes to hiring and retaining really good folks. All right, and for now, I'm going to go ahead and pivot on over to building data-driven fundraising operations. We can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Allison. So as Allison said, we'll hit building data-driven fundraising operations, and from our perspective and beyond staffing and retention, the organizations that engaged in our Philanthropy Plus survey reported that data-driven fundraising operations are both a challenge and an opportunity. So as you see on this slide, the fourth most often cited challenge is leveraging data to make better decisions. At CCS, we see this not only in higher education, but we really see it across all of the sectors that we're privileged to partner in, all the philanthropic sectors. And what we do is we engage our data analytics team that undertakes RFM analyses, predictive models, and other data studies to inform decisions. And maybe if we could just propose 2 questions for each of you where it's applicable to consider. So first, do you need to build out your data analytics department? And second, how do we incorporate data into our annual and, if applicable, our capital campaign case for support? How does data enter it? Accordingly, we suggest thinking of these data challenges really as an investment and an opportunity. So if it makes sense, suggest that you invest in this area so that you're more comfortable, you and your teams, and obviously more confident with the data. Go to the next slide, please. So when asked to rate the knowledge competency of their fundraising staff in, as you see, these 8 different areas, organizations cited event planning and board relations at the very top. While on the previous slide, I mentioned that organizations reported data-driven decision-making was a top challenge, just 11%, as you see at the bottom, said their staff was knowledgeable in this area, which leaves a big gap between the challenge and the internal ability to overcome this challenge. This could point to training opportunities to equip your team with data analytics tools and know how to apply trends to decisions in your department. As we all know, higher education institutions are very complex, and there's many places for data collection, and we pose 2 more questions to consider. Does all of your data speak to each other? And secondly, is it set up in a way to cross-analyze? Those 2 questions. We'll go to the next slide. Metrics tracked. Why don't I kick this one off, Allison, and then please weigh in. But as you see, nearly 3 of every 4 respondents among our higher education institutions measured the number of gift requests in their metric tracking. I was quite surprised that just about 2 of every 3, 65%, measure the number of visits, and 64% the number of new gifts. So while new prospects acquired is not as popular of a metric to track, organizations we found who cited donor acquisition as a top challenge, they should or might even consider gathering more information on their acquisition rates to develop a targeted approach to overcome this challenge. A couple tips, and then I'll turn it back to Allison. Consider updating your database and track your activity in a point system. We do this a lot in our campaigns, and we have some fun with it as well, some healthy competition. So what do I mean by a point system and what to track? Track a volunteer who schedules a visit or a staff member. Give them a point for that, perhaps. A point for requesting the gift or pledge. A point for closing the gift decision. A point for recruiting a volunteer. So some healthy competition, and we find it really spurs a lot more activity in campaigns. And let's face it, activity definitely helps raise the money. Activity drives the funds raised. Allison, anything else to add on this slide?
I do have a couple things to add. So I think all of us love the concept of moves management, right? We believe that it takes between 3 to 4 moves for a donor to make a decision about making a gift, the biggest gift possibly in some cases, to an organization in his or her lifetime. So let us, if you will, for my 55 friends on the phone, take a look at the line items that are in a dark teal, right? So if we take a look at the number of visits, 65% of folks, shared that they track the number of visits. Now, fundraising is tied directly to the number of visits. We'd love to see this number go up just a bit. When we think about, what we talked about a little bit earlier around, hiring and retention of development staff, when we tie that directly to rewarding performance, this is one of the areas where we can reward performance. Now, the other teal area, the number of contacts, whether it's phone calls, emails, or text messages, being able to tie a gift directly to the number of times a development staff person has been reaching out and aiming to cultivate a donor and his or her family can certainly contribute to what it takes to secure a gift successfully. So overall, and Bo, if you'll agree with me here, next time we conduct this survey, I think it would be incredible for those numbers to move up just a bit so that we're able to have a better handle on the kind of cultivation that we're doing, how successfully we document it, and how consistently we report on it. All of that does tie into how successfully we're closing gifts and making strides towards successful campaigns. Thanks so much, Bo. And now we're going to take another pivot, if you will, with me. We're going to talk about our fourth area. And I think I saw a really wonderful detail in the chat from George. And we'll save about maybe 5-10 minutes toward the end of our presentation for conversation and an opportunity for some shared learning from those on the call. So George, would love for you to sort of take a deep dive when we're able to have a conversation in just a bit. For now, we're going to pivot to the next slide where we talk about the role of DEI and how important it is on a donor's radar. When we think about the folks who responded to this survey, 75% of those who participated said that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, was indeed a part of their strategic fundraising priority plans. Now, if you're in this camp, that's a step in the right direction. A couple of things that we'd like to impart as we continue this work, as a field and as an industry, specifically in higher ed, and in fact, as a country. Number one is to ask yourselves and ask your leadership, well, what's our why? And why are we seeking to incorporate DEI in our fundraising strategies? Once we're able to authentically answer that, I think it'll help us build out a certain set of fundraising plans that are genuine and that provide the connection to donors in a real way. The other piece to really ask ourselves, we can ask our campaign cabinet, we can ask our board, what is the shift that we want to see? if we are investing in DEI and we're making this a stronger fabric in the way that we raise money, what are the outcomes that we're hoping for? The next sort of, idea to think about, if we are indeed making strides towards incorporating DEI in our fundraising tactics, how are we going to measure the outcomes? Will it be around diversifying donors? Will it be about, creating different case materials? And if that is the step that we want to take, how are we going to measure success? And the piece that kind of ties it all together for a lot of us working in fundraising, if we do make a strategic shift, a long-term shift in how we incorporate DEI in fundraising, what's the overall difference? Do we want to see bigger gifts in philanthropy? Do we want to see higher numbers of donors? Do we want to see more volunteer work in terms of recruitment and their ability to connect and commit to working with us on our various fundraising endeavors? So those are the few things to think about as you and your teams consider DEI strategies as it relates to fundraising. Now, if you will take a look with me on the right-hand side, we're going to take a look at whether or not or how many organizations discuss DEI concepts with donors. So we see, just about the same levels of responses. 35% of those who participated said yes. Occasionally, it's on the radar. 35% said yes, always. Now, if DEI is to sort of be a principle around how we do fundraising, we'd love to see, more folks shift to the yes, always level of participating in this kind of work and being successful at it. We'll go to the next slide. We'll think about how DEI is a priority for donors and schools. And when we really take a step back from it all, we're changing the way higher ed welcomes students who are there now and how higher education will welcome students who are making their paths to universities, community colleges, PWIs, and HBCUs. And as we think about these kinds of factors, this is the work that makes student enrollment, recruitment, and retention successful. And that trickles down to how our fundraising is also successful. Now, when we asked about those who have made specific changes to donor and volunteer relations, we see that some folks modified messaging used with donors, and that means using inclusive language that creates a sense of belonging. We saw that 32% of those who responded made a change in their giving purpose, how they were directing dollars, where those dollars landed, and how those dollars were reported on in the very end. Now, where can we do some work? You guys, we can do some work in terms of our volunteer recruitment and management practices, and how we relate to people who give of their time, talent, and treasure with this work will certainly help us move that 15% forward. The last statistic we'll look at is the folks who revise their donor pipeline strategies. And when we think about, donors who give, of those who are at a high level, high net worth, and can give major gifts, there's really little difference in terms of one's ethnic background and how that relates to making consistent philanthropic gifts to chosen institutions. And so we'll go to the next slide, and that gives us a deeper understanding of it. We think about, gifts, pledges, and commitments that have been made in support of racial equity. And as you all can probably understand, this has become so much more important in our civil society as a country to learn how we're A, measuring the dollars that go toward racial equity, and B, the outcomes that we expect from that. Now, if you think about the span of time between 2011 and 2019, 38.9 billion went toward racial equity. Now, in the span of just 2 years, more than half of that was committed to racial equity. And that can probably relate to a few things. Number one, we may have more programs that relate to racial equity. B, we have more outcomes that are expected from the organizations that are doing social justice work. And C, we acknowledge that there's a wealth gap in terms of racial groups in America. And so as we seek to promote racial equity, the dollars that are directed to help reduce that gap are probably being directed more robustly and more abundantly. Another statistic for us to keep in mind is that $24 billion was committed since 2020. What we'd love to see is how that figure will increase over time, particularly as racial equity and social justice become more important in our work. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And I see we've got a comment in the chat. Ali, thanks so much. We'll look forward to unpacking that in just a little bit. Wanted to offer this important data point to those of us on the call. If you are investing in DEI work, it's important to know you're not alone. About 3 of 4 of our respondents launched new DEI-related programs, the majority of whom said that they were starting to do a lot of fundraising work around new projects and programs related to DEI. And whether you call it DEI, social justice, or systemic change, this is where we see universities excel, right? Because education, we know, is one of the most important factors in social mobility, not only in the United States, but around the world. And so as we're able to incorporate more DEI-related programs, we're able to open the doors of opportunity to new groups of students and new families year after year. So some other important statistics to keep in mind I think, George, I'm not sure if this is your comment, but someone else offered that they were doing fundraising training in terms of DEI to both staff and board members. That's also an important factor. And another sort of area where a lot of respondents offered some input, they made a lot of changes to their board recruitment and relations practices. And we'd love to see how that's going to play out over time. So with that, I think that brings our 4 areas to a close. I think we can pivot to some conversation. We've got about just enough time to hear from those of you who are on the call to share some of your experiences and best practices. And also, if you have any questions or just want to unpack anything that we've offered today, we'd love to carve out some time for that.
And just quickly, I want to shout out to Ali Lambert. You mentioned it, Allison, in the chat, but you're so right, Ali, that it's essential that we differentiate the types of visits and substantive versus just doing it for the sake of a meeting. So you're spot on there. It's so important when we track our metrics. Open it up, like Allison said, please.
Indeed, we're going to take ourselves off spotlight so we can see everybody's faces, and we'll take a deep dive into some conversations.
And maybe just to spur thinking on it, some questions for the group, 3 of them. What data point of all this that Allison and I shared was most surprising to you? We'd love to know that. Secondly, which data points will impact your work the most? And finally, which data points would you suggest CCS analyze next year? So we've got pens and notepads in hand. We're all ears, of course. And let's maybe open it up so we can see everyone. Thank you. There we are. Ali, you wait in the chat. I gave you a shout out. You want to put you on the spot here, but just take us a bit further on, because you're so right about substantive versus just any old meeting, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so at the foundation, I'm at the VP for development at the University of Vermont Foundation. And I mean, I've been in this business for a long time, and there's the, do you count visits? Do you measure that as a metric? And George is laughing, he's on my team. And we talk about it a lot, because I want people to, yes, we know that, and visits take all different iterations these days, but if you're not getting in front of people, you're probably not asking, and therefore you're not going to be closing gifts. But sometimes it's just to get the credit for the visit doesn't necessarily help move the prospect in that moves management space. So it's weighing is it another coffee, or is it a really important meeting that moves them forward? So just balancing that as a gift officer, you're constantly thinking, I need to get the visits, but really I'd rather you get half the number of your visits for the year, but have them be really substantive at the end of the year.
It's really good. Thank you, Ali.
And Allie, you probably know this, one of our favorite, four of our favorite letters, DCBA, right? And how we categorize a discovery visit versus a cultivation visit versus a briefing visit versus an ask. And for those of us who love our A's, I love my A visits, right? And maybe the focus can be on, really persuading your team to pursue the A's, right? We know we have to have, a certain number of folks that we're meeting with just in terms of discovery and that first cultivation step. But when we can make that ask, that's when we know we're heading in the right direction. So thanks for offering that.
Yeah, 100%.
And to our friend George, I saw him agreeing, and you gave us a really robust comment in the chat. Do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, well, excuse me. What's funny is I didn't know you were going to talk about DEI. You were just talking about retaining and recruiting employees. And I immediately thought about the UVM Foundation's astounding and really good work in the DEI space, and just providing for a full day of learning every year, but also having a foundation Diversity and Inclusion Committee that puts on programming. We do a regular, seasonal newsletter. We do all kinds of programming. We've spent quite a bit of money on trainings for the whole staff, bringing in consultants. So we know that this is very important for our entire staff, not just the major gift fundraisers, but all staff to be trained, be culturally competent. And I don't know, I think that's just a thing that the foundation's done that made me a very happy employee here. Not to mention Allie as my boss, of course.
And one of the rewarding things to think about, and I know that Bo will agree because, we're working on this together. We work on this with a lot of our client partners. There are so many ways to categorize diversity, right? A lot of us right now are working on diversity as it relates to, the identity of race and ethnicity, but we can also include, gender, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, national origin, ability, and other visible and invisible traits. And so when we really start to unpack what that looks like in our development shops, on our boards, and even at our leadership levels, to give it that kind of scope and depth can really help us get to a good place. And for those of you who are willing to sort of explore what diversity looks like, at least as it relates to race and ethnic background, there are a number of organizations and affinity groups like HIP, Hispanics in Philanthropy. There's AADO, African American Development Officers. There's APIP, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy. And there's WOKE, Women of Color in Philanthropy and Fundraising, that can all offer some incredible resources and networks. And, especially as it relates to building, pipelines that are diverse in terms of our workshops. So those are just a sort of handful of some organizations that are working toward that end.
Any thoughts to keep hopefully the conversation going? As I mentioned earlier, any thoughts? We're going to do this philanthropy pulse at CCS every year. Data points that we should analyze. Should we analyze these same four? Should there be others? Any advice? We're all ears, please.
As a follow-up to that, though, I wonder what would your board of trustees or your foundation board, what would they want to learn a little bit more about when it comes to the decisions that they're making to either grow departments or launch campaigns? What are the data points that would be helpful in your boards and the presidents of your institutions in many cases? What would be helpful data points for them to have? Well, Bo, I think we did a good job. I haven't heard a lot of.
No, I think you did a great job. I think I put everyone to sleep, so no one else is weighing in. But back to you, Allison.
Not the case, not the case. But I will. Oh, sorry, George. Did you want to hop in?
No, sorry, that's fine. I didn't have anything. Thank you.
Well, I will say that we conduct this survey every fall. Is that right, Caitlin? And you'll see the invitations come out to a number of institutions. And hopefully, if you are able to participate in our survey later this year, we'd really love to collect your insight and data points for when we have the same conversation this time next year. Looks like there's a question in the chat. Let's see. Alan Goldman. Wondering whether more shops are using money raised as part of their gift officer metrics, and if so, how are they determining what counts as money raised per fundraiser? That's a good question. We'll open it up to some of our colleagues to weigh in on what their considerations are. Alan, did you want to offer any other thoughts?
Thanks for taking the question. No, for me, I was just wondering, we're putting together a new team related to the lack of filled positions. So we're hiring some new people, and I'm wondering, as we're moving forward, what is out there as guidelines for, I work on a gift, someone else works on a gift. So that's one piece of it. And then also, because most of the metrics I saw that you were tracking have to do with things that are more concrete, measurable. Did I have a visit? Did I put in a proposal, et cetera? So I think the threshold question is the amount of money raised, is that something that many places are implementing as a metric to say, okay, you have this goal for this year, or this range of goals in this year's, and then the part two of the question was, how is that being measured if in fact the trend is to include that kind of measurement in metrics?
Thank you for that, Alan. See, I know we've got some folks, and Bo, if you want to weigh in here. Brooks, I know I'm sort of pivoting to my other colleague who's worked on a number of different engagements with client partners. Any observations from you, Brooks or Bo?
I'll just say, Brooks, please weigh in to the first part, Alan, of your good questions. And I would defer to our colleagues on the second part, those that are implementing these on the ground. But absolutely, yes, money, funds raised, Alan, is a very important, if not the most important metric. Brooks, please.
Yeah, thanks, Bo. Critical data point to track, just to track accountability. Of course, you want development departments working with each other so that 1 + 1 is 3, and that oftentimes when people partner across offices or departments within the development department, it's a much more effective ask because you're given the opportunity to think more thoroughly about what the value proposition of a gift request is. But I know a lot of other organizations, to encourage that collaboration, do shared fundraising goals within smaller teams, just to encourage that. So I'll add that, and would love to hear others' thoughts on it.
I'll weigh in, if that's all right.
Please, Alan.
So it's interesting, Brooks, you brought up the joint credit, and that's something right now our system, our database can't do it without our fundraising dollars being doubled. So right now we're unfortunately, and Alan, to answer part of your question, we're having to track that collaborative work more in a descriptive form when they fill out a performance review. It is something we can see as one part of our metric. We can see if a proposal closes that people work together, but with dollars, we're still working that out, because I find that if you can get the credit for it, the work, there's much more willingness to want to do that, because you can make the ask more robust. But the way we track our dollars raised is all based on what we enter. We use Advance right now as our system, and we have to track. If you ask someone for, let's say, $250,000, a proposal goes in the system. If it closes at 250, you get 250 credit. If 250,000, excuse me, towards your dollars raised goal. If it closes at another level, you get that number. But we see that you asked for the higher. We just might see you get the lesser depending on what comes in. But we're able to track the single ones easily. And the gift officers on my team and the rest of the team at the foundation, they come up with their own dollar goal based on their current portfolio. So not everyone's is the same depending on the school or unit that they serve. So they have that number, knowing of the proposals more than likely add up to the 2 million or whatever the number might be for the fiscal year.
Yeah, just to add to that, Ally, it can be cumbersome to sort of have more descriptive and detailed notes along with every gift, but it's so important to encourage collaboration and get teammates working together rather than just laser focused on hitting their number.
I can weigh in real quickly. Alan, I think one of your questions is what counts, what gifts count? At the University of Vermont Foundation, we count obviously all cash gifts. We count the full total of a pledge up to 5 years, and we count bequests. So all those go into the total dollars raised.
Excellent. So, Bo, if we have no further questions, would love to just start to wrap up again with an invitation to join this work. You'll see the invitations come out later this year. Would love for everyone on our call to participate in the pulse survey that we'll be releasing later this fall. Bo, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I'll echo everything, and hopefully we score a few points by giving everyone 8 minutes back. And again, we're very grateful, particularly to Ally, to George, and he just went off the screen, so I can't remember his name because I'm old.
Alan. Yeah.
Alan, thank you, Alan. And thanks so much. Hope to join you next year for the CCS Philanthropy Pulse. Many, many thanks. Enjoy your week. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.